You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the latest People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, joining you as always for our Thursday pod. This week, we are delving back into the world of our spin-off series called What is a CPO? And I think I'm now contractually obliged to have this co-host on with me because she invented it. Debbie Mitchell, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I like contractually obliged.
Yes, written blood.
Yeah.
This was my idea originally, Chris. You're never allowed to do one without me. Is that how we're doing this now?
I think so, but I'd rather you wanted me on it than felt contractually obliged to have me on it.
I always want you on it, Debbie. I always want you on it. And we've wanted to get this guest on for a while, who has been known to Lace in previous guise, but she's in a new role. We'll get her to explain that in a minute, but it's Michelle Wall. How are you doing, Michelle? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you, Chris. And I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, you, of course, aren't contractually obliged to be here. So we know that you want to be here, as opposed to both Debbie and I, although Debbie and I, we love this particular spin-off series. And just a reminder, for those of you listening in, it is called What is a CPO? I'm going to get Debbie to kick off with that first question in a moment, but we might as well do a bit of a check-in so that our wonderful listeners can find out a little bit about yourself and your background, Michelle. So can you enlighten the lovely listeners?
Okay. And again, thanks, Chris, for having me. And Debbie, I'm very pleased to be here. So I'm Michelle Wall. I'm a Chief People Officer, and my company is called 8 Group Service Partners. It's actually a very different way of working that I have, which we'll get to as we go through the podcast. But in effect, we call ourselves a people-first, PE-backed operating business, and we're actually a platform that is buying and building across the FM space, facilities management space. My backers are actually in the US. So a lot of the ways of working that we'll talk to are very US focused. I might use some audacious words, but that's because that's how we're running. I apologise up front.
It's all good. It's all good. I think it'll be interesting to dive into a little bit of that, Michelle, as we go. But I think we like to start with the critical question. In this series, we're exploring what the role of the CPO is in all sorts of different organisations, from big utilities companies to retailers to other organisations. Some of them big, some of them small, some of them local, some of them global. And so it's just really our opportunity to look at what some of the commonalities and what some of the differences in the CPO role in those kind of contexts. But where we always like to start is, from your perspective, what is a CPO?
My perspective has changed over the years. I've been in this space for quite some time, but I also feel it's changed because the organisations that I work with have changed and evolved, and there's a different expectation. But I think, in a nutshell, the Chief People Officer is somebody in the business that is basically accountable to ensure that the people strategy works. Although we call ourselves often, in most businesses, we're under the business support area, we're actually not what I would now say is a support function, because that suggests that we're holding everything else up and supporting it like a decent girdle.
It's like we are subservient. Yeah, go on, carry on.
Subservient, and we're not at the front end, the sharp end of the business. And over the years, you hear people talking about commercial CPOs and understanding the business. I genuinely feel that the Chief People Officer now is much more commercially aware, but they're enablers of the strategy. And I would say we are value drivers. So we're not a support function, although the support areas that we cover are also very important. But basically, if you look at my role, and in particular, more so now, I exist to design the business, to work with a strategy. I actually exist to ensure that the operating model is working correctly. But I'm also interested in how our employees experience that business. I don't just talk about culture. And I'm here to make sure that, in particular, on a growing business, we're all growing, but I'm helping the business to scale, to perform, and to sustain that growth. And it's those sorts of things that a CPO has probably got as their staples now.
Yeah, I've got a quick question because I like what you said there about putting HR at the forefront. And I said the word subservient, and you said the word business support, but there's other common vernaculars. Back office is another example. And marketing, finance, operations, HR often get lumped with that. How do you get the rest of the business past those kind of common perceptions of that business support function? What's kind of advice that you'd give to people who are probably sitting either going for a run or on their way to work, listening to this and just thinking that is a perception that we have and we wrestle with? What sort of things have you done in your career, or any thoughts that you have? And it can be from the current business or it can be from previous businesses that get the business to understand that value that HR plays.
It is a common problem, and I would say everyone out there that's either a CPO or aspiring to a CPO has probably grappled with the same question for a long time. Essentially, I don't start with the people strategy. I start with the business strategy. And I don't want that to sound glib or any of that. But the fact is, when we are designing the strategy, and I'm really fortunate in the business I'm in right now, we're a startup in effect. So I'm there at the start. But I am there in the room, a common voice and part of a team that is talking about the business strategy, the direction of travel for that business, and so on. Then I happen to know a little bit about HR and how we work with people. And that's when I start to bring in my professional understanding and overlay that business strategy. The thing is, HR should not work in a void, okay? We are there, and I did say about business support, we do support the business, we enable the business, we grow the business, but we can't be sitting in a void that says the HR policy or procedure says you can't do that. Mm-hmm. We have to be relevant, and that's how we maintain our seat at the table, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michelle, because you and I met and have worked together before, and I quote the example often of a CPO I once worked with who, when we created the people strategy, had very few HR people in the room that you brought to the table. First of all, we were very driven around the business strategy, but the people you brought to the table were business leaders to help shape what that people strategy should be to enable that delivery of that business strategy, right? And it's always really stayed with me that it's very rare that we see that happen. It's normally the business strategy and the CPO will be part of that business strategy, but then the HR team will figure out what the HR team will deliver. Yeah. Can you just talk a bit conceptually about why you made that choice in developing the people strategy in that way?
I made the choice on that basis because when you're talking about that occasion, we were in a business that were actually looking to sell to another PE house, private equity, the investors. We're in a situation where we were global. We were in the tech sector rather. When we're talking to PE houses, so the financiers of all these businesses, frankly, HR language does not resonate, okay? Ultimately, a PE house are investing money to create value for various investment funds, as it were, which are actually funded by people's pensions and everything else, okay? So they're not going to be centred around the HR terminology. They're going to be centered around how do we grow this business? How do we extend our reach? How, in fact, do we sell this business for 5 times its value? If you're not in a PE environment, that basically means when you're selling from one part of a business from one PE house to another PE house, they'll talk in language of 5x or 10x. It basically means whatever your profit is right now, you'll be sold for sort of 5 times that amount or 10 times that amount or what have you, because they see value in it going forwards, okay? So if I'm talking to financiers and investment people, they really are not interested in the HR KPIs of this business. They're more interested in having a proper talent in the business. They're more interested in alignment to culture to make sure that people are engaged and that they're going to stay here, because that makes us productive, it makes us efficient, and therefore we can make ourselves profitable. If I have a strategy that is built by people that are talking just HR language, then it will not resonate with the private equity house. And frankly, what will happen is they will look to their finance colleagues and just talk numbers. And that's when you start to lose the identity of that business.
Michelle, this is really interesting. And this is a theme which has popped up on a couple of our conversations with CPOs, regardless of the size of the business. I remember last year talking to Catherine Dolan, who now the CPO at Mighty, but she was at Bureau Veritas at the time. And we were talking about speaking the language of the C-suite. What I find interesting is how, and I guess my question to you is, how does the comms or the communications that you deliver to your fellow C-suite, how does that change depending on who the person is, CFO, CIO, COO, CMO, CEO? How does that change? Or in the environments that you've been in, where the drive is more towards that commercial lens, is it just a lot easier? Has that changed? And the reason I'm asking that as well is that I've seen a lot of talk in the marketing world, which is driving marketing professionals to speak less in marketing language, like page views or clicks on a website or whatever it is, and more towards that business output. So I've seen that in the last, certainly post-pandemic era in the marketing world. And I've heard that from CPOs in the HR world. And just as you were talking there, I thought, I've always looked at it as, does the way in which you communicate change depending on whether it's the COO or the CFO? But actually, it feels to me like it's more of a universal language. Do you see that as true when you go into those board conversations?
When I'm in the board conversations, the key is the people in the room are obviously concerned at the bottom right-hand corner of your charts, as it were. But the fact is, most boards will understand there's probably a couple of key items that they need to be clear on, some KPIs, if you like, or scorecards that they need to be clear on, that they know if they're in that position, if they're on that level, then things are working okay. And for instance, you've got, in my business now, we've got 2 KPIs that we talk to the board about, okay? When I get further down the organisation or I'm talking to a different group of people, there'll be a whole scorecard that's got lots of people's statistics on it in any case. But when I'm talking to the board, we talk ENPS, so Employee Net Promoter Score. That's because our investors, Alpine, who are US-based investors, demand an ENPS score twice a year from every single business on their platform. And that's quite different to a lot of other PE houses. But we've got ENPS. We know the health of the organisation, if that is trending in the right way. And the other thing that we're interested in as a business is the retention of my engineers. And the reason why that's important, because most HR people will say every employee is important, and they are, okay? We all form one big bubble of important people that are getting the job done. But the front end of my business are the engineers that are in front of the client. They're the ones that have to show that they are qualified. They've got the quality. They're keeping the health and safety. Got big health and safety issues, obviously, within FM and so on. If I talk about engineer retention, that actually tells our clients that we've got some really clever people here that are tenured, that they're staying, the business is great, they want to stay. They must therefore be quality, productive, and worth keeping around. Okay. So my language talks much more positively, if you think about it, net promoter score, employee engineers retention. When I get into different forum, if I'm trying to problem solve, I'll be talking about attrition, people that are leaving. I won't be talking about the people that we're keeping necessarily. And I think as I've matured over time, in the board, you can't lie to a board, right? Because you'll get found out. Okay. You have to use positive language that is very much focused on the end goal, right? They want the business to grow. No board wants the business to disappear or have loads of problems, because a problem might mean the money's not coming in. So you have to talk in a positive language. Practically, when you are in other forum, often the reason you're there is to do something else. Now, I might use positive language if I'm talking about the strategy going forward, or I'm talking about employees. I don't want them running to the hills and being scared of things. But actually on other days, then I have to be quite deliberate in, this is an issue. These are the things we need to address. And what are we going to do about it? But Chris, do I use a different language? I think I do. But it's usually the inverse, because I'm trying to do something other than just keep the board happy.
When you talked at the beginning of that piece, though, Michelle, you talked about, I guess it's about keeping the board happy or the senior stakeholders happy. But I wonder how that translates down the organisation as well. So rather than speaking an HR language or using our favourite buzzwords of the moment, does talking a business language resonate better across the workforce, do you think?
In some workforces, I think it does. And I think I used more business language in my last business. We were tech, we were international, global. And the business language is much more agnostic. So if you're talking to a lot of people in Spain, it's their second language. You've got to use language that can be internationally recognised. In my current business, our main group of colleagues, as I say, are engineers, and then obviously the people that work around those. So if you like, a traditional, what would have been called blue collar workers, as it were, they're all UK based. Frankly, a majority of my engineers are also mobile. So they're not in an office. They're not every day exposed to a common business language, if you like. So you have to use language that resonates, that they understand, or understand what it means to them. If you like. It's useless talking to a whole group of employees in any business just about the EBITDA, because let's just talk profit. People understand the word profit. EBITDA is, what the hell is that word? You know,
everyone's Googling.
And often it's said in different ways and you're not quite sure, and it doesn't often translate. If you've got an accent, then saying EBITDA actually doesn't sound the same in Europe, for argument's sake. So you kind of got to use language that resonates both culturally and geographically, and I think to the sectors that you are working in.
Let's talk a little bit about the speed of growth, right? So the sort of startup concept, the fast growth, the 5x, 10x kind of concepts. What does that mean for you as the CPO or for your HR function? And particularly in terms of, for example, the culture that you have to create and how you might go about doing some of that.
Okay. So I think it's worth me telling you a little bit about my current business, because it is different to how I've previously worked. Our sell point, so when we have President of Mergers and Acquisitions, which is a lovely grand title, but this is somebody and a team that work in 8 Group, my business, and they're going out and seeking businesses to buy and bring onto our platform, if you like, under our umbrella. But our sell point to them, our pitch, typically we're buying businesses that are still founder-led. And the founder, we are not going to come in and change your culture. We are not going to come in and break your people. What we are going to do is buy you as a business you will retain your brand, you will retain your client base, etc. But what we're going to do is now give you some economies of scale across all of the businesses. If I've got an FM, facilities management business down in Southampton, and I've got one in London, the Southampton FM business will have clients that are all over the country, but their reach for those businesses is quite a bit more difficult. They've got to send an engineer on a 3-hour journey, so that increases the costs and so on and so forth. They can now use the London business. However, on everyone's values, if you like, and everyone's vision, is we all believe that it's a local relationship with a national reach. And if your culture is very different in the Southampton business compared to the London business, what you can't do is have the customer see something different. Okay. So as a business, because we've got these staples, we're not going to come in and change those things. What we have to do is make sure that the culture is understood, that's got some key context, if you like. So one of the things that our business is set up to do, I said at the opening thing that we're a people-first business. My private equity house are probably one of the first PE houses that I've really believed that as a notion. Throughout my HR career, people have always said we're a people-first business, and it doesn't always resonate. In this case, we are people first. We use the terminology of people first. We use the terminology that actually says by having people first, we can grow the business, we can grow our cultures, and we can grow our reach. But we all have a common view that the people are running the business, that are our business. That's how we sell. So when we are growing rapidly, you asked about what's that mean for culture and so on. When we're growing rapidly, I actually, in my first 90 days of buying a business, I go to that business and we work on what we call the people first operating rhythm. It's actually our business strategy. It talks vision, it talks culture and values, etc., etc. Within the first 90 days of landing here, that's a staple. It's a non-negotiable. Those businesses have to go through that due process. And every quarter, we renew it as well. So this is now baking into actually the values that we've got around here. I'm not going to tell you what those values words are for this local business, but you'll start to see, because I've connected on all of them and we're all facilitated with the same person, actually the values start to align. Because who would sit there in a meeting and say, I don't believe that people first is the right thing to do. Right? Yeah. They might not use people first as the language. They might say our team are our assets or whatever. Yeah. So in fact, the cultures are different if you were to read the documentation, but at their core is people.
And linked to that, because obviously the way that your business model works, obviously you're trying to add value from a sort of centralized purpose whilst also keeping elements so that we're not going to come in and change too much. Yeah. But ultimately, to add that value, to get those economies of scale, there does need to be some form of change that happens in the business, whether that's we're going to put in a company-wide new system, performance management, or whatever it is. That's something. How do you manage the challenges with that inevitable change, even if there are certain key bedrocks that you're saying, look, don't worry, we're not going to come in and say you all need to act in a certain way, and we're not changing the culture from this perspective, but we are going to make changes here. What's your kind of views on some of the challenges or some of the opportunities that come out about some of those types of changes, whether it's a process or a technology or what have you?
Some of those will be defined as non-negotiables. Now, an IT person or a systems person, CIO or CTO, and a CPO, we will often say that actually systems are quite pivotal. They allow transformational change and so on. But effectively, and they can actually align cultures and so on because you're using a common platform. What we say, although we're not going to change your culture, Things like systems, there are some non-negotiables. Now, the systems themselves, when they come in, they will be looking at our scheduling system, if you like, where we put our engineers in and so on and so forth. We'll look at a common finance system. We'll look at a common system for contracts management and health and safety, knowing the assets that each of the businesses have and so on and so forth. Those will come in as non-negotiables. The issues that we find is making sure that you get it in the right order, if you like. Effectively, when we buy a business, we are actually, and these things are still evolving because we're still quite young as a business, we are providing a playbook for, again, American language, but it's the manual of how to do things around here. Okay.
System, we use playbooks as well, don't worry.
Exactly. Same thing. So categorically, day one, when we sell the business, there will be a meeting and you will be doing this and this. By the first 30 days, you will be doing this, first 60, first 90, and so on. We stick with that playbook because I say it is evolving, but effectively the businesses will know what's in that playbook, even when we're pitching and saying we're not going to come and change anything. But pre-deal, we often will land, because we do lots of due diligence. We find out what's with this business, where are the boulders on the runway, what have they got problems with. If you consider the businesses that we're buying are anywhere between, we've had some smaller businesses that have been 20 headcount in that business. Now we've probably got a few that were about 200 headcount. And the next one we're getting is a 300 headcount. Now, what happens in a business of that size typically is they don't have an HR person. They're unlikely to necessarily have an IT person. They do have a finance person because they're the ones that have helped them sell the business as well. There are no systems from an HR perspective. There are few, even you might have the employee files, the personnel files, as was probably it'll be a secure drive, but there's nothing linked to an HR database. So one of the biggest that the business has is coming in and helping with the systems. Straight away, you can see an outcome that says, oh, hey, now I know who I'm employing, where I'm employing them, how many days they've got, the contracts are easy, et cetera, from an HR perspective. But equally now, when I'm scheduling 4 plumbers and 2 electricians, I know who's got those skills and I know where they can get, so the customer gets them on time and so on and so forth. So the systems is actually quite it's a heavy lift because there's a lot of work, but it's an easy one to get in.
Easy one.
A bit of a quick win. Sorry, Deb, we've got a couple more minutes left, but I think Debbie's got a question just before we end.
I think I'm probably going to steal your question, Chris, because I was going to just talk about what's the future, Michelle. Is that your question? Yeah.
But you go for it.
Okay. So it's about what's the future of the CPO, what's the future of the function as businesses evolve. And we hear a lot sort of the AI kind of lens on what the future of work might look like. But what do you think that means for the CPO?
For the CPO, I think to remain relevant, we still need to use AI to augment what we do. But one of the biggest things that I think right now, and I see it all the time, is that too many people are relying upon AI as a replacement, if you like, and not using their human touch. And I think the CPO has to make sure that still remains true and it is still a human touch. In forward, things like API, I think is for our new people coming into HR, to just rely on AI, they will never learn what they need to learn. It's okay to augment, but if you read a book, you take it in. If you practice it in the workplace, you take it in, you learn it. If you go to AI to give you a resolution and you have your answer within minutes, it's unlikely that you've learned what the answer should be. And I think from my experience, the CPO in the business, because we still have that human psychology that we worry about, I think is actually making sure that the businesses don't lose their personality and don't lose their human touch. But by the same token, going forwards, we are not just a policy team. we make sure that those policies are being practically used, but we actually have to maintain our position of supporting the business strategy with some people strategy solutions, if you like.
I really love that. It's a really good way to, I love this question because it enables us to look forward, but some really interesting stuff that we've talked about today there, Michelle and Debbie, obviously that communications bit, that speaking the language of the C-suite, the culture when you're working within like federated businesses and how that sometimes it needs to give and take, but perhaps more around the value that a centralized HR or people function can add to these organizations. And sometimes we talk about change being difficult for some people, but also equally change can be a really positive upside for people. And as you've talked about, like putting in those types of systems that people are now able to go, oh, actually, that's made things a lot easier for us. We weren't doing it that way before. And that's all really fantastic stuff. Michelle, thank you very much for your time today. That is absolutely flown by. And as Debbie and I will reflect on after we've finished this recording, we only asked you about 3 of the questions that we all talked about beforehand, but it's been really good chatting to you.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the time and I hope to see you both again.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
Debbie, thank you very much for co-hosting as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
And of course, my thanks go to Michelle. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we have today. If you would like to connect with Michelle or Debbie or myself, then the details will be in the show notes as well. But for now, thank you very much for listening. On behalf of myself, Debbie and Michelle, we hope you are going to have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll catch you next time on the People Agenda podcast. Bye-bye.